What if the lessons you never learned are shaping your marriage today?
Hmm. That's a question that we're talking about right now
Yeah,
because we've been discussing about things that we learn that we don't learn. We don't sit down intentionally to learn it.
right.
And where do we do that from? Well, it starts with our most influential caregivers, which are our parents, right?
Exactly.
Our parents have different mannerisms, different ways of doing things. And as we're being raised, many times we can get into those same patterns, those same habits. And Simbas, Dr. Les and Leslie Parrott call it introjects. Well,
Hmm.
introject is something that you do without even recognizing you do it, and it
Yeah,
comes back from your own family habits.
right. Yeah, yeah.
We certainly have had a few of those that we've
Hmm.
recognized.
Yes.
Sometimes they can be good for your relationship.
Yeah,
Sometimes they need to change because what
yeah.
we're really interested in is making the best marriage for us.
Right. And it really depends on how flexible you are, as a
True.
spouse. Example of an interject would be she was used to washing dishes.
Absolutely.
Okay. We all wash dishes, but she's used to washing the dishes prior to eating dinner. So we'd make dinner and then she'd wash dishes and then we would eat.
Well, I
Okay.
wouldn't wash dishes. I would wash the
Or
pots.
wash the
It's like
pots. Okay.
clean up as you
Yeah,
go.
I understand.
That is definitely how
Right.
we did
Yeah.
dinner.
Yeah. And I wasn't born and raised like that. So when that happened, I thought, okay, fine, I'll be flexible with that. It's not a big deal, because the dinner was not getting cold. So
Well,
that,
sometimes it did become a big deal.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes he would
We work
say,
with it.
"Can we wash those dishes later?" And of course, my response was, "I'm almost finished."
It depends how long it took.
I was
that's,
almost finished by the
that's
time he
right.
said that.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
didn't cause a major problem because we
No,
discussed it.
that's right.
But we recognized
Hmm.
that his mom, when she did dinner, she left everything. They sat
Yeah.
down, they had
Yeah.
dinner, then
Yeah.
all of the kitchen was cleaned up afterwards. My family didn't operate that way. I
Mhm.
didn't operate that way. So definitely, I just did it all.
Right.
But everyone has introjects coming
Exactly.
into our marriage.
That's
And
right.
there's some common areas that we actually um, learn but not learn. We didn't
Hmm.
sit down and try to learn
Yeah.
that we need. There's three ways we can learn. We can learn, we can unlearn, and we can relearn.
Right.
So let's talk
Yeah.
about some of those ways.
Yeah.
We were talking about some of those ways.
Yeah.
And one of the first ones is obviously our communication styles.
Communication styles. Yeah, and there's a couple different types. There's avoidance of
Oh,
communication. Like,
yeah.
no, I don't want to talk to you about that.
Sweep it under the rug,
Yeah.
right? No, we're not going to have
Yep.
any
Yep.
communication.
Or maybe there's some communication, but it's very short, and then maybe there isn't any communication. It's just
Right,
silence,
right.
like
You also can have that passive aggressive communication where they
passive
make
aggressive.
you think everything's okay, but inside it's not okay. That we call that false harmony.
Yeah.
Like you're thinking things are going good.
They'll think, okay, if there's silence, then you know what, it's just going to go away on its own.
Right,
Time will tell,
right.
and
And
that's not the case.
it's funny because the Bible actually talks to us about communication throughout the entire Bible,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
especially well, one of the scriptures that we're praying over our marriage right now, we talked about praying scriptures,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
James 1:19 that
Yeah.
says, be quick
Quick
to listen, slow to speak, and
Right.
slow to anger.
Yeah.
That's a communication tool.
Mm.
What? Be quick to listen, slow to speak,
Mm-hmm.
slow to anger. Well, that even goes into conflict resolution, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
the book, the Bible, the book of the Bible is loaded with communication techniques.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes they affect our flesh and we
Yeah.
don't like it.
Yeah. Another style would be just simply yelling. Okay. Because you
Yeah.
want to get your point across. You're yelling because, hey, you know what? I figure that yelling is going to have a major reaction on that other part. That's what you're hoping.
Yeah.
But and quite frankly, you're also blaming that person for something that they shouldn't have done, but you're yelling at the
Yeah.
same time. So that's just another style that could be very destructive, obviously, in a marriage.
That's true.
So,
And one thing we know, communication needs to happen in a marriage. It is
yeah,
the
it's a
lifeblood
lifeblood.
of a marriage.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we're talking about how we're talking.
Right.
We're talking about what we're talking about and what we're
Mhm.
not talking about. It's super important. And a
Yeah.
lot of times those conflicts come because there's an introject. Something we've learned
Mhm.
doesn't line up with something our spouse has learned.
Yeah.
And now we're in conflict with it, which we don't have to be.
Exactly.
Another one
Yeah.
of those areas are gender roles and expectations.
Yeah.
This doesn't matter if you're a newlywed or you're engaged or you're already married. And why already married? Because a lot of
Mhm.
times couples get into situations where life changes. So those roles
Yeah,
and
exactly.
expectations
Yeah.
need to adapt and adjust with it. And sometimes one or the other doesn't want to make that adaptation.
Yeah,
And that causes conflict.
exactly. And my folks, they were very traditional, so boundaries are very well set in their roles, and it worked for them. My mom cooked, my dad worked, obviously, and she took care of the home,
Right.
things at home. Took care of my sister and I. Dad would come home, obviously. We'd have dinner, and I mean, it was very, very segmented. There was very specific boundaries and roles.
Sure.
Didn't even think about it back then,
and that's a lot
just
different today.
it's a lot different today.
And the reason, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, both people are working now.
Right.
Okay. So you're coming home and you're going, okay, who's going to cook or who's going to do dishes? We're going to do both. I mean, the roles have really changed, and it's not really traditional anymore. It's basically modern society. And if it works for you all to do it that way as opposed to traditional, then that's great. But you need to find out exactly which role and expectations work for you best.
Yeah. And I think that because we do have more educated women today, more women going through college, more women being CEOs, etc., we don't have those traditional. And if you have someone come from a traditional background, they're certainly going to expect the roles to line up with what they're doing and what the mom did. And this symbis assessment that we have, it actually talks about who did this in your family. And it really lines it out for you where you have a deeper understanding. And believe it or not, a lot of couples struggle trying to determine who's going to do this or who's going to do that. And that is one of the things that we work through with couples with our symbis assessment. Another thing I know that we struggle with that we sometimes have to learn, unlearn, and relearn is how to handle our emotions or the lack thereof.
Yeah, to me, especially men, a lot of times, especially in traditional models and traditional families, the men weren't to show their emotions because they would be tough and everything. They went to war and they came back, and man, I don't show my emotions because that's considered weakness, and crying and such was considered weakness. Well, quite frankly, no, it's really considered a strength, obviously.
Yeah.
When you're able to cry.
You get that junk out and have
that
room for good stuff to come
in. So, but many times the men would just suppress their emotions. And then all of a sudden what happens?
You get in a relationship.
And 5 weeks later, a year later, all of a sudden, bam, it just comes out.
Right.
And in anger, and it's not good. It's destructive.
Well, a lot of us were taught, stop that crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And especially if you're a man and you have a wife that's wanting you to open up emotionally, you're not going to open up emotionally because why? Well, because you have been taught, do not share emotions. Well, and a lot of times that comes from whether our mom was healthy emotionally and shared emotions properly with us as children, how our dad shared his emotions. So this is definitely an area that comes into our marriage again, that we may have learned unhealthy ways, not intentionally, just by our caregivers, because they're the most influential people in our lives when we first are born. And we recognize, okay, I need to unlearn that and I need to find a healthier way to relearn. This first way we bring into our marriage, it may have been a way that we didn't intentionally do, but that relearn, it's going to be intentional. And if it's not, we're going to sometimes struggle and butt heads in our marriage simply because of things that we need to unlearn and relearn. And there's a whole lot of ways that we can relearn things.
There's a whole lot of ways. And, within that handling of emotions, you can be very, very overreactive to situations.
Absolutely.
And so that just brings a very dramatic and explosive reaction. And I say reaction as opposed to even thinking about what you're saying, because there's so much emotions. It's simply a reaction.
Right.
Okay. And so, self-regulation really is so important. And who's going to help you with self-regulation? It's only Christ.
Absolutely.
It's only Christ that's going to help you with self-regulation and give you a peace and give you a thought process before you latch out.
And also the thing about it is we have to remember Jesus was emotional.
Well, yeah.
I mean, Jesus wept. Jesus had anger. Jesus was anxious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're sweating drops of blood at
quite emotional.
The Garden of Gethsemane before the cross, that's pretty anxious.
Yeah.
And it's not that Jesus was weak. He even knew that everything was going to be okay. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line, and he knew that was his purpose. He had those emotions and he shared those emotions with us so we would know emotions are okay. Right. Jesus said, if there's any way this cup can pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. The bottom line is we saw emotions in the Bible, so we should expect to be emotional, not hate them and run from them, but handle them in a healthy manner. Right. And I think conflict resolution is definitely something that we learn in an unhealthy way many times. That needs to be unlearned and relearned. That conflict resolution, I don't know if any of y'all were sat down and said, okay, this is how we handle conflicts. We were not. No. And before we go any further, we just want to say this isn't about blaming your parents. No. This is about recognizing there are better tools at my hands and my fingertips right now that could improve my marriage from what I brought in that I did not learn, yet it is impacting my marriage. I didn't sit down and intentionally learn it, but it's having a great impact on my marriage, and it's not necessarily positive.
Yeah, and maybe you never saw your parents apologizing.
Absolutely.
In situations, it's or forgiving one another. And obviously that's what the Lord wants us to do is forgive one another for any kind of a conflict.
I was just going to say, I also think in there, a lot of times parents hid their conflict. So you may have never seen your parents have conflict. So when you get married and now you have conflict, you're like, oh gosh, I married the wrong person. Something's wrong. No, a lot of parents hid it. And it's okay to have healthy conflict in front of our children with healthy resolution in front of our children. Because otherwise we set them up really not to understand conflict's a part of life. It's where we grow. And so I know I did not come from a home where they hid it. Mine was more vocal, very loud and vocal. So we knew when conflict was going on. I didn't get to see the resolution.
What about when one spouse has a scorecard relating to conflict? They have a conflict today, and then she has one with him next week, and then he has another one. I mean, there's almost like a performance type conflict in their situation, and pointing fingers like, you know what, we already talked about that, and they're bringing up the past, instead of dealing with something that could really help them out is to obviously ask for forgiveness, like I alluded to before.
And even with conflict, all of these things are talked about in God's word. The scripture that says, as far as it depends on me, live at peace with all those around me. As far as it depends on me, I have a role in this. So the Bible talks about communication. The Bible talks about whatever we do in our roles and expectations, do it with the spirit of excellence. The Bible talks about the fact that we have emotions, and the Bible talks about how we should be in conflict. And probably the last one to address is like affection and attention. Depending on how we were handled as children, if we had a mom that was doting and you came and you were hugging her or touching her all the time, or she was touching you, or a dad that gave you a big hug, maybe giving affection to your spouse just comes super easy. However, what about those that did not receive that and their spouse's love language is physical touch? That you have to learn how to give physical touch. How do we know this? We've actually worked with couples with this. And it's funny some of the times that they really are clueless. It's not that they don't love them and they don't want to. It's just, I don't know what to do. What do you mean pet her? Like this? Am I supposed to do that? And it is a learning, but again, it's intentional.
Yeah.
It truly is intentional.
Yeah.
And even the appreciation.
Yeah. Appreciation. So much so. You can easily take each other for granted. The longer you've been married, you can take each other for granted. That's not God's design, obviously.
Right. That sun is just like coming in.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The appreciation is important. And it's also like, what if you didn't get a lot of affirmation, appreciation toward yourself as a child, or you didn't hear it go back and forth between your parents? Like, thank you, honey, for opening the door, or thank you for taking that trash out, or thank you for this, or I appreciate this, or thanks for taking care of this. There's a lot of families, they don't hear that.
Yeah.
And they grew up not hearing it. Well, what happens when your spouse is, their love language is words of affirmation?
Yeah, right, exactly. That's so important to understand what their love language is.
Yeah. So then we have to unlearn not showing appreciation.
Yeah. And
relearn how, or unlearn and then relearn a healthier way of being able to appreciate.
Yeah.
And I think for us, this is really so important because we see so many couples struggle in these areas. And we want you to understand that unlearning and relearning is a process.
It takes time. This is a journey, where marriage is a journey. So be easy on yourself. Okay?
Yeah. Extend grace to yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. And your spouse.
Yeah.
I think the first step is a step of recognition. And I think that, we have a SYMBIS assessment.
Yeah.
And this is what it looks like on the outside. So a SYMBIS assessment actually goes into communication, conflict, intimacy, money. Yeah. It's an online assessment, 94% accuracy rating. If you're an engaged couple, this is an amazing assessment to see where your relationship is now. Yep. And it helps you see what your starting spot is. So then you can just continue to move up. And those things that may be challenging, we work on those to bring them up to strengths, because new challenges are going to come. Exactly. We know there's going to be new ones.
Yep.
And what about for married couples?
For married couples, we have the same SYMBIS, but it's also has a section for married couples as well.
Yeah, it's SYMBIS Plus.
SYMBIS Plus, as well as blended families.
Absolutely.
It's so important.
Because it doesn't matter if you've been married 5-10 years.
Doesn't matter.
When you do a SYMBIS assessment, you still are going to see where you're at. And you may have had some areas that you were really doing well at when you first married, and maybe you feel like you've kind of fallen down and lessened those. Yeah. That's not a major problem. Yeah. You want to see where you're at so you can start moving up. So I believe that if we're ready to break free from like patterns that we never chose, this is a great place to start. If you have any questions, you can go to heartbuilder.org. If you need any encouragement or marriage coaching, heartbuilder.org.
Yeah. Remember, you say I do.
And we help you say I do.